Let's move on to the next topic in part 1, which is tax registration, especially focusing on tax registrants. These are the entities and individuals who are required by law to register for a tax identification number in Vietnam. As you can see on the slide, the law categorized them into 6 main groups. First, we have organizations and individuals subject to tax registration. This is a broad category that covers standard corporations, enterprises, and independent professionals, establishing their tax presence. And second, household and household businesses. The law specifies households and household businesses. In Vietnam, household businesses are very common, and they have their own specific tax registration requirements, separate from large corporations. Third, individuals subject to personal income tax. This applies to regular employees, freelancers, or anyone earning an income that meets the taxable threshold. Fourth, look at the organization and individuals responsible for withholding and paying tax on behalf of the taxpayer. A classic example here is an employer. The company acts as an agent that withholds PIT from your salary and pays it directly to the tax office on your behalf. They must register for this specific withholding tax code. Fifth, this is a very important group for international business, foreign organizations, and non-resident individuals conducting business through e-commerce or digital platforms. If you are a foreign digital provider operating in Vietnamese market, the law now strictly requires you to register for tax here. Finally, we have a catch-all category, other organizations and individuals subject to tax registration under tax laws. This ensures that any unique or newly emerging business structures will still cover are still covered by the regulations. And now, we know who needs to register. Then let's talk about when they must do it. This is a very critical topic for your exams because deadlines are highly testable. The most important thing to remember here is that the deadline depends entirely on the triggering event. As a general rule of thumb, the magic number in Vietnam is 10 working days. Let's break it down. First, for standard businesses and household using the modern one-stop shop system, it's simple. The tax registration happens automatically alongside your business registration. Second, if an organization must register directly with the tax authority, they have exactly 10 working days. The countdown starts from the date on their own business license or the day they start operations. Third, what about foreign contractors? Or oil and gas agreement. The same rules applies here. They have a 10 working days. 10 working days from the exact date they sign the contract. Here. Fourth, let's look at individuals paying personal income tax. You also have a 10 working days from the day your tax liability arises. However, please note a common exempt trap. If you are registering your dependents for tax relief, that must be completed by December 31 of that tax year. Fifth, for withholding tax agents such as employers, the rule is slightly different. You must register at least 10 working days before you file your very first tax return and make your first payment. Finally, for foreign e-commerce and digital platform, the law is very strict. You cannot wait. You must register before the first transaction occurs or before the tax liability arises. To summarize this slide, remember the 10 working days rule for most cases. But watch out for the exceptions like withholding agents and foreign digital platforms. Next, let's look at Section C, tax registration dossiers. This tells us exactly what paperwork or digital documents must be submitted to the tax office. The law divides these requirements into three distinct categories based on the applicant. Let's start with the first group, organizations subject to tax registration. They must submit a formal tax registration application or a prescribed electronic form. They need to include all necessary documents required under their specific registration procedure. However, if their business registration is integrated with tax registration through the one-stop shop system, it is much easier. The data is automatically transferred electronically from the business registration system. Moving on to the second group, households, household businesses, and individuals. Similar to corporations, they must fill out a prescribed tax registration form or submit electronic registration information. Crucially, they must provide their personal identification information, such as their national ID card. They must also attach other supporting documents where required by law. Finally, let's look at the third group, which is highly relevant for cross-border operations, foreign organizations, and individuals. They need to provide prescribed tax registration information. They must also submit clear identification and business-related information to provide their legal identity abroad. For foreign suppliers, they are also required to provide their payment account information when necessary. To sum up this slide, the key takeaway is that the type of documentation you need depends entirely on whether you are a corporate operation, a regular individual, or a foreign provider. Uh, Places and methods for submission of tax registration dossier. Now that we know what to submit, we need to look at how and where to submit. The law provides 4 distinct channels for submissions here. First, we have electronic submissions. This is the most modern route. Taxpayers can submit their files through the National Public Service Portal, the National Identification Application, or the Tax Administration Information System. Second, there is integrated registration. As we discussed briefly on the last slide, that is done through the business registration system. It automatically combines your business setup and your tax registration into a single, seamless step. Third, we have a direct submission. That is a traditional method. You submit physical documents directly to the competent tax authority, which is required for certain specific cases that cannot be processed online yet. Fourth, what about tax withholding or tax payment on behalf of taxpayers? In this scenario, the dossier must be submitted to the specific tax authority that is responsible for the relevant organization or individual as prescribed by law. Now, I want everybody to look closely at the bottom of this slide. There is a key update effectively from July the 1st, 2026. The main key takeaway here is that tax registration is becoming increasingly digitalized and integrated with both business registries and national ID system. Because of this electronic data sharing between different government branches, taxpayers no longer need to submit information that the authorities already have in their database. This cuts down on red tape and makes compliance much faster.